We're going to ready to continue with the second session. We're going to explore fraud in more detail from a different angle, further presentations coming up and a panel discussion. So as ever, please do use your app to submit questions. The app allows you to submit questions for each panel presenter. You can also use the mic, so a mix of both would be ideal to keep everybody very engaged and interactive. Also, go ahead and tweet using the hashtag EM ecosystem. And with that, I will introduce our first speaker, which is Dirk Meyer from Risk.Ident. Welcome, Dirk. He is a fraud solutions consultant with 15 years plus experience, right?
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, let's have a look. Ditch the buzzword, beat the fraudsters in 15 minutes. This is a challenge. So I like to start with a quote from Brad Johnson. There is no patch for human stupidity. Brad is a very well-known fraud consultant from the US, spent a few years in government-funded holidays and then changed the sites and now make fraud prevention. And Brad referred to the obvious gaps. The colleague before said, if you have no support, for example, they will use a gap and set up a support and grab up the data from your customers. Something like that are obvious gaps. When I heard this quote first, it was like a flashback to me because when I started 2001 at the first European online bank, within my first week, I found 180 fraud cases. And this was 15% of all granted loans at this bank. For a small online bank, this is a real problem. How could this happen? So everybody felt incredibly stupid and like, it was quite easy. It was a quite simple gap. The bank started with a minimal viable product, how we would say today. They just had an online application form. And the applications were approved by the mother company. This was a branch-based bank. And to get in credit there, you need an account for at least 3 months, a salaries account, or better, for the last 10 years. So they never saw a fraudulent post-ident before. They never saw a fake salary slip before. This was a quite obvious gap, but nobody thought of it. And this is what Brad is referring to. But how can this happen? How can those gaps happen? When I was a fraud consultant years later, I saw it several times at PSPs, at merchants, at big banks. They set up a new product, and there was just some obvious gap where they're just missing that there may be fraudsters coming up. And sometimes they even didn't recognize that they were fraudsters, just say, we can't handle the creditworthiness risk behind. Our processes are mainly built on trust. We're trusting each other. And we're trying to go and automate it. We're not typically thinking about that. We're not typically thinking about fraud. This is a problem in minimal viable products, bringing them on the market. Now I work for Risk.Ident. Risk.Ident is a Hamburg-based company, 100% daughter of the Otto Group. We're providing a GDPR device fingerprinting. So we're identifying laptops, smartphones, computers, and we're gathering additional information so we can identify fraud on that. And I might disagree to the panel before because for sure there are data pools. There are data pools on device fingerprints, but there are also data pools on fraud cases for banks in Germany, on insurances. So I don't see what the colleagues are speaking about. Cyphers in the UK is working for now 30 years, I think so. It is a lot of work, yes. We're driving the biggest device fingerprinting pool in the DACH region. And we also have a fraud case management system. And if you want to know more about device fingerprinting or fraud case management, come to a booth, PO8. so I can end the marketing part. Thinking about fraud, I'm missing the science side. There seemed to be little interest in science. All studies and so on coming from suppliers and vendors. So it's no wonder that the fraudsters always seem so sophisticated. Are they really? I think most of the fraudsters are doing try and error and looking for obvious gaps. And a second point on that, those obvious gaps typically occur in big fraud cases. Think of CEO fraud, Swift fraud case, flow tax. Yes, obvious gaps. But we are working different. We are designing our processes. Mass consumer processes are different. If we're thinking about fraud, we're accepting it because we want to build our services convenient as possible. Our problem is something completely different. Our problem is that we may not recognize that there is fraud before the damage is massive. This is different. But why is science not interested in? I think we need to dig deeper and also step ahead and get a meta level to build better processes and better systems and not always look on one method or another. 10 years ago it was scoring, the last few years it was machine learning. Yes, quite good methods, but only methods. And fraud is dynamic, they will change. So what is the overall behavior? Before I come to that, let me make two assumptions. The first assumption is we build our processes as customer convenient as possible to increase sales. Therefore, we accept that there may be fraud in there. Another point on that is we want to have a fast time to market, but at the end, fast and most convenient. The second assumption is we can make the best decision if we sort out the fraudsters first. We have to sort out the first. Why that? The best decision on our honest customers can be done by statistics. We can calculate an optimum. This problem is solved 30 years ago. What do we need for that? We need true data. We need a solid model, so the behavior is the same in the past as in the future. And we need a clear target definition. This is quite simple. But it does not work on fraudsters. They lie on the data. They change their behavior, because if I decline your application, you will change your data and your behavior. And it is quite hard to get a clear target definition because there are so many different modi operandi. There is not a single point where we can say, this is just loss, creditworthiness loss. Okay, so convenient customer processes, sort out the fraudsters first. What's about statistics in all that? Yeah, it's a method. It works quite well in some environments. Every time when you have true data and you have a gap which remains very long, for example, skimming, the gap was for 30 years and you have genuine data because the data was generated automatically. Then statistics works quite well. And you need a lot of fraud cases. Think of my example from the beginning, in application fraud, with 180 fraud cases. Statistics don't work. And I can't wait until I have 400. So in payments, telecommunication, account transactions, with small tickets, it works quite well. In application fraud, yes, it may help, but it's just a method. Let's address the fraudsters' problems. And what are the fraudsters' problems? Then this is a point where we're digging deeper. The fraudsters' problems, for the first, they have limited resources in mass consumer processes. We're working on mass consumer processes, and what they always need for is a name, an email address, maybe a telephone number, an address, an account number, or another payment method. And this is something you see in your own system all the time. You have the same devices. You have nearly the same names. You have nearly the same or iterated email addresses. You have same addresses because these are limited resources for the fraudsters. For sure, they can change it all the time. For sure, it is possible to obfuscate your device. But will all the fraudsters out there do that? No. 98% don't do that. They aren't all masterminds. The data breaches came from the masterminds. And they sell it to the stupid out there who just try it and sit at home and want to get some goods from the Otto Group or from Zalando or whatever. So if it's laziness or if it's a question of the business case, don't matter. They have limited resources and we can address that problem. Second is behavior. You may have an order from Slovakia, ordered in Düsseldorf and delivered to Frankfurt. The first part may be okay. If I have a second and a third and a fourth, there's a pattern. And I can put a rule on it immediately before my statistic works. And yes, if I don't know it, for a long time the gap remains open. My statistic will show it to me. My machine learning will show it to me. And you can put another rule on it, make it better. But these are two main problems of the fraudsters which we can easily address. Limited resources and behavior. A third one only works in some environments, but I always want to have to focus it a bit. The target may be warned. If you have a support, and I call you and say, hey, I saw fraud on your system, what will happen? It's funny. Just try to call your own support or send an email to your info rep. But in some environments, it's worked quite well. Think of dating platforms or something like that. So what do we have to do? Yes, we have to get as much data as possible, and best if the fraudster isn't aware of. This is device identification. This is also biometrics. Yes, and we have to think about ethics behind that. But also resources like telephones, addresses, and so on and so on. We have to link it. We have to identify the used resources. We have to find anomalies in it and overall statistical patterns, and we have to pick up some tips. And we need a bit more. We need investigators. Investigators have something different. They can see gaps. From the beginning, we want to avoid stupidity. And your systems can't deal very well with new gaps. Not the rules, not the statistics. Human can. And one part is customer convenience. You want to handle your honest customers as good as possible. A second one is you may have victims behind. We talked about identity takeover. So there's also a point where you say, okay, do I want to handle victims the same as my honest customers? But third is a human will pick up gaps much faster than a machine, and then you can put a rule on it. So you need some kind of graphical user interface, and you need well-educated investigators. Please mind the gap. If you put up new products, new systems, new product lines, new sales channels, just make a checkbox and say, did we talk to the fraud prevention side? And be honest, you can't do it by yourself. Your blind spot is within your company. You have to talk to somebody from the external to have a view on it. This does not cost too much money, and it's always a question to get somebody with an external view on your process. So let's wrap it up. Get genuine resources. Cross-link the data. Find used resources, share anomalies and find anomalies on rules, need an investigation system, and you need investigators. And I don't agree with the colleague who said there's competition on it. We're talking about fraud. It does not really help me if my competitor is hit by fraud. What is the help for me? The fraudster is away. Much better if we can share data and if we can share knowledge about used resources and if we can share rules, because maybe we get rid of some fraudsters. For sure, not all. It's a natural phenomenon. But of some of them. So let's work together. And if you would like to discuss, we're talking about a labeling concept to get a better industry-wide sharing approach. We have to be clear what kind of fraud we're talking about. What is a used resource and an accept label on it?